Chapter 14. 14 Goblins. 10 boys, 4 girls. It's a party. As they cried out in pain, everyone else were just opening their eyes. Their cries startled them greatly. More arrows flew past, along with eerie cries from the creatures who fired them, which only added to their fears and shock. They all got to their feet as fast as they could and looked in the direction where the missile attacks had come from. A large group of goblins was now charging at them quickly. There was little time to react. Belfin and Phileas were side by side. A goblin was rushing at each of them. Belfin quickly drew his short sword as Phileas cast Burning Hands, hoping his spell would go off before the goblins hit him and disrupted it. It did. The fire burned them and they cried out. The goblin that was coming at Belfin went down as the flames scorched across his face and body. Seeing that, the halfling immediately moved back and hid in the trees. The goblin got up and looked for him, screaming from the pain of the fire burns. But Belfin was nowhere to be seen. The other goblin, who was also screaming in pain, swung his sword at Phileas, but it just grazed across his body, wounding him only slightly. As Jack started to get up, he reached for his wooden shield that was on the ground, then quickly changed his mind and decided to try to get his sleep spell off, knowing if a goblin struck him first, the spell would be disrupted. It was risky, but a risk he felt he had to take. He sprang up as fast as he could and cast Sleep. 2 goblins were charging right at him. One of their swords sliced across his chest just as the spell went off. The pain was great and he almost fell backwards, but he was still standing. The other goblin was just a few feet behind, but as he swung his sword, he collapsed, crashing into Jack, knocking him down. Lightmane and Tenneth turned around quickly, both in a lot of pain from the arrow that was in their leg. Seeing 2 goblins charging at them, they fought the pain as best they could, helped by the adrenaline that was rushing through their bodies, and drew their weapons and attacked. Tenneth's mace hit one, but the goblin's sword partly blocked the mace, which lessened the damage it caused him. The other goblin swung, and his sword hit Tenneth square in his chest, but it clanged off the banded armor. Tenneth let out a laugh, feeling empowered with his new and improved armor. The 2 goblins that were charging Lightmane all of a sudden collapsed to the ground, as did the 2 on Tenneth. Latia was wondering which spell to cast, her Earthbow, or maybe Entangle, but when she saw how close they were and charging, she grabbed her sword, but in her haste she accidentally grabbed the undead slain broadsword. Darn, she said, as she swung it. She wasn't quite used to the weight distribution of the broadsword, and it clumsily clanged off one of the goblin's swords. But the other goblin lunged at her with a dagger, and it ripped into her side. She cried out, but kept fighting. She didn't even realize that one of the goblins who attacked her was female. Shinfia saw 2 female goblins rushing at her, wielding daggers. As they tried to stab her, she struck one with her hand and stunned it. The other goblin just missed her, ripping part of her tunic, and then collapsed to the ground. Nightwind saw 2 goblins charging him, which only filled him with energy. He cried out, "Goblins! Finally, let's party," he said with great glee in his eyes. The pair of goblins was a little different, though. One was male, and one was a little bigger, and one was male and was a little bigger than the others, and the other was another female, and seemed to have more gear on her than the others, something the dwarf noticed and found odd, but didn't think twice about. His focus was on the larger goblin, hoping that he was their leader. The bigger goblin came at him fast, and his sword cut through and sliced deep into his side. The pain flooded his mind and body, but so did the adrenaline. The female was about to attack, but then saw out of the corner of her eyes goblins falling to the ground. She stopped and seemed to panic. Nightwind cried out and screamed at the goblin as his battle axe came crashing down and cut deep into its belly. The female screamed as loud as she could. The big goblin fell, blood pouring out of him. She screamed again and then turned to her fellow goblins and screamed at them. Backing up, she fell to her knees, dropping her weapon while putting her head down. Nightwind, shocked, yelled at her, "You surrender? What?" All the goblins immediately dropped to their knees, their weapons falling to the ground. Latia looked at the female and saw that she was shaking, and tears were streaming down her face. She was looking back and forth now and crying out, What, Latia did not know, for she didn't speak Goblin, but Nightwind did. Belfin came out from hiding and was just about to attack the goblin that was on Phileas from behind when it dropped to its knees and appeared to surrender. Everyone stopped, not sure what to do. Jack: we should just kill them all now, right? Before they wake up. Nightwind: she cried out, "Stop, we surrender." And then she yelled it to the goblins. I've never known a goblin to surrender. They either fight to the death or turn and run. That's it. What's going on here? What are you doing? He yelled to the female. The female goblin had 3 belt pouches on her waist and was opening one. Crying and trembling now, she cried out to Nightwind, "Please, no, kill us. Please, must try save him. Please, help." Latia: you speak Goblin? What is she saying? Nightwind: something about help her save him. Don't kill us. Something like that. Latia was close by and watched in astonishment as the goblin pulled bandages from her belt pouch. She kept looking left and right, and then her eyes caught Latia's, and she seemed to be pleading. She pointed to the goblin that Nightwind had dropped, and she reached out with the bandages in her hand and spoke. Latia, completely shocked at what she was seeing. What is she saying now? Nightwind: something like, "Please, let me try." Latia motioned to her and then watched as she started to apply the bandages. She wasn't very good at it, but good enough. Latia couldn't get over how frightened she looked, let alone that she was crying. Then she reached into another belt pouch. Everyone became tense, worried she might be reaching for a hidden weapon or something. But what she pulled out was even more shocking than bandages. In her pouch was a jar of healing salve. Latia, looking bewildered. She has healing salve. Where in the world did she get healing salve? Nightwind: maybe we're not the first party they've attacked. I think he's dead, though. Latia: well, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but here's hoping he's not. Nightwind just shook his head in disbelief at what was happening. Everyone else stood watch over the goblins who had surrendered and who had fallen asleep. They were all very nervous, but were also as shocked as Latia was at what they were watching. A male goblin who was close by tried to move closer to her. Everyone flinched. The goblins looked up and flinched. She turned and said something to him, and he sat back down. Nightwind, seeing Latia look over, I think she said something like, "No, stay," or something like that. Shinfia, looking confused. Is she the leader? A female? Nightwind, quite amused at what Shin said. I think the one on the ground is. He's the biggest. Maybe she's his mate. Latia, she seems to know a little of what she's doing, but she apparently doesn't realize you should apply the salve and then the bandages. I'm going to try to help her, she said, looking very concerned. Everyone became tense again. Latia slowly reached out to her. She flinched and seemed scared. The goblins flinched again and almost started to get up. Nightwind tried his best to speak Goblin. It's okay. She try help. She healer. At his words, the goblins relaxed and stayed on their knees. Hearing what Nightwind said, she looked at Latia with tears in her eyes, almost as though she was crying out for help. She put a little salve on her hand, lifted up the bandage, and applied it to the wound. Latia, I guess the order you do it in doesn't really matter. This kind of works too. Latia pulled out her own jar of healing salve and applied a little more. She watched Latia intently, almost as though she was as astonished as Latia at seeing her apply salve. With her hand on the goblin, Latia tried to see if she could feel a heartbeat. It took a moment, but finally she did. Latia, he's alive. Oh my God, we might actually save him, and I don't know why that makes me feel kind of happy, or something. Teneth, well, I'm not casting a Cure Light Wound spell on a goblin. Besides, I only have 2, so I'm casting them on Nightwind and whoever else needs one. Jack raised his hand. That would be me. Ow, he said as he tried to get up and then thought better of it. Latia had a healing cantrip spell, so she quickly cast it on the goblin. When the female goblin saw the magic come from Latia's hand and slightly heal the wound of her mate, her eyes widened and she looked at Latia like she was a goddess or something and cried out, "Anexixis! Anexixis!" She smiled now and seemed almost happy. Nightwind, seeing Latia looking for translation, I think it means magic healing or magical something. Latia never felt so confused and disoriented in her life. Saving a goblin made no sense. They're supposed to kill goblins, but here she was concerned and trying to save one. Her brain seemed to be misfiring on all cylinders. Then, all of a sudden, she got another idea. Latia, oh wait, my herbs. They might help too, a little. Can't hurt. She reached into her pouch again and pulled out a sprig of herbs. At the sight of the herbs, the female goblin looked extremely excited and turned to the goblins and cried, "Gizzing! Gizzing!" Immediately, to the shock of everyone, the goblins stood up and started dancing. Startled and caught completely off guard, everyone backed up and weren't sure what action they should take next, if any. Jack, what the hell? Why are they dancing? Latia looking very confused. Nightwind, she said, worried at what his answer would be. What does gizzin or whatever she said mean? Nightwind, shaking his head while almost laughing. Party. Latia, party? Are you kidding me right now? So she sees my herbs and thinks that means it's time for a party? What? Shinfia glanced at Latia with a big smile on her face. They've obviously had some of your herbs. Latia put her head in her hand and turned to the female. Honey, oh geez, what do I call you? Their dancing was starting to look crude, but when Latia spoke to her, she immediately stopped and had them all stop dancing. Then she looked at Latia and cowered in submission and said, Kiss, Gizadet. Looking at Nightwind, well, kiss means yes, I think. No clue about Giza, whatever she said. Shinfia, yes, mistress? She asked with a big smile on her face. Lightmane, smiling. Is that how you're hoping us men will start talking to you girls? Shinfia rolling her eyes, but then smiled. Fine by me. Latia held her herbs in front of the goblin and had her come down by the male. She broke off a piece and somehow got her to lift up the bandage. Latia then rubbed her fingers against the herb, causing some of it to sprinkle on the wound. The goblin watched in astonishment as it soothed the wound ever so slightly. She gasped again and bowed before her. Latia felt uncomfortable and tried to get her to stand back up. She looked up at Latia almost longingly, and then looked around and pointed where she was looking, and then looked back at Latia. Latia just looked at her, confused. Looking sad, she then looked at the dwarf and spoke. Kish. Me, Kish. We like you. She pointed away from them. We go walk outside, like you. Look for things, like you. We not like others. We walk, look for things. Latia, now almost smiling. Nightwind, did you just make a new friend? What is she saying? Nightwind, looking very confused. Well, at first, I thought she was saying that she likes me. That was scary enough. But then she said, we not like others. She said they walk around looking for stuff, like us. Lightmane, like us? As in, like adventurers? Phileas wanted desperately to speak now. Adventurers? Are you even suggesting that these goblins are adventurers? Come on now. They wouldn't know the first thing about adventuring if their life depended on it. They're goblins. They hunt and kill things and eat those things, and then they go back to their dark caves and sleep. They're filthy, vile, evil monsters. Adventurers, shaking his head. That's, without a doubt, the most ridiculous thing you've ever thought, Lightmane. Lightmane said nothing. Latia, realizing she was also in need of healing, pulled out one more of her herbs and started eating part of it, while sprinkling the rest on her wound. Kish, seeing Latia eating an herb, became excited and came and stood before her. All the other goblins watched with excitement in their eyes. She then reached into another belt pouch and pulled out some coins and seemed to be offering them for her herbs. To Latia's further shock, the coins were gold. Latia, guys? She's got some gold coins in her belt pouch. Belfin, what? Gold coins? Oh, this just keeps getting more bizarre by the minute. The party couldn't believe it and came over to see. In her hand were 7 gold coins. Phileas, sounds like a great trade to me. Latia, oh, come on, we're ripping her off. Phileas, How so? For one thing, she offered, and for another, this isn't money to them like it is for us. She probably sees this as a very fair trade and could care less how much it benefits us. I doubt she knows the value of those coins, for they have no value to a goblin other than they like shiny things. Latia, okay, but I'm going to give her my healing salve too then. The goblins all came over and gathered around Kish and put their heads down and their arms outstretched. The sleeping goblins started waking up and saw this scene and were confused. Latia, standing before 7 goblins, their heads down and their arms out. In that moment, she looked like she was their queen, and they were worshiping her. Latia, I guess they all want some. She sighed. Fine, why not? I can always get more at the keep, I'm sure. Shinfia came next to Latia and looked at her and smiled, and held her hand up next to her. My mistress, give me some herbs, baby. Latia took the 7 gold coins and then reached into her large belt pouch and grabbed all of her herbs. The goblins looked up, eyes and mouths wide open with excitement. Latia, I feel like a mother with her children in a candy store. Shinfia tried her best not to laugh. She handed one to Shinfia and said, hold it up for them to look at, but don't do anything else yet. Wait for it. Shinfia looked intrigued and held up the herb. The goblins looked at it longingly. Latia then started passing one herb out to each of them and gave the rest to Kish, who put them in her belt pouch. But while she passed them out, she held one up high in her hand, just like Shinfia was doing, as if to tell them that they couldn't do anything until she said so. To her surprise, they seemed to understand and stood still, with herbs in hand. Latia then held both hands up high, as did Shinfia, but then paused and whispered to Shinfia, Is it gizzing? Shinfia whispering back, Something like that. No, gizzing, I think. Latia winked at Shinfia, and they both cried out as loud as they could, Giss thing! The goblins went nuts. The ones who had just woken up jumped up, shocked at what they just watched, wondering how on earth their brothers and sisters were partying with non-goblins instead of killing them. But at the sight of the herbs and the 2 female creatures yelling, Party! They could only start dancing and crying out in what would turn into a crazed goblin frenzy of crude but festive dancing and partying. Bale, feeling a little awkward at what he was seeing. What are those? Are those herbs? Sheila, yes, but they're very special herbs. Bale, looking very concerned. You're not planning on eating them, are you? Please tell me you're not going to eat them. Sheila, okay, I'm not going to eat them. Bale, rolling his eyes now. Sheila, are you going to eat those herbs? Sheila appeared to be examining them. I was thinking about it. Want to join me? Bale, no thank you. I've seen what herbs can do to people. They mess with your mind. Sheila, my dear Bale, herbs do many things, but they don't mess with your mind. What they can do is alter your perception of reality, but not in bad ways. Well, they can, but mine don't. Mine are the purest herbs you'll ever see. I make them myself. My herbs heal, restore vitality, expand your mind and your senses. They'll even, slowly, over time, help you achieve all of your dreams and desires. You just need to believe. The herbs will do the rest. In time. Bale, well, aren't you the mystical guru now? He said as he shook his head in frustration. I've heard that some people smoked or ate herbs, and the next thing they knew, they were all engaged in an orgy. Gross. Bale was starting to look like he was going to throw up. Sheila started laughing. Don't worry, my friend, or should I say my floppy-eared friend, or do you like FEF better now? Bale, looking perturbed. I need to come up with an abbreviation for you. That made her laugh. Sheila, don't worry. I assure you that my herbs would never do that. They're not sex herbs. Bale immediately relaxed and sat down at the table across from her. Oh, good. You really had me worried there for a moment. Glad those aren't those kinds of herbs. Sheila. Yep, nothing to worry about. You can relax now. These just make you feel good and open your mind. Free it, actually. Bale smiled and seemed to relax. Well, then I'm looking forward to trying them. Sheila paused for a moment and then casually glanced the other way with a smirk on her face. Oh, just so you know, I keep all my sex herbs in another room. Wouldn't want to, mix them up, she said with a straight face. Bale's head hit the table. Sheila tried not to laugh, but failed.